My name is Marietje Schaake. I'm a member of the European Parliament, where I work in the Committee on Foreign Affairs, Committee on International Trade, as well as on Europe's digital agenda. And in that capacity, I've thought a lot about what opportunities technology brings to people to enable their human rights, but also to the threats that it can bring to them. And I think it's very important that we tilt the balance towards the positive impact of technology on human rights. In 2009, when I was elected, I was immediately confronted with another election, which were the Iranian presidential elections. And on the one hand, the world was able to be eyewitness to what was happening in the streets because people were filming with their mobile phones the demonstrations, and they were able to organize themselves, access information despite heavy censorship. So we saw kind of a breakthrough in how human rights defenders and activists were using technology. The government too, in fear of losing grip and control, was also deploying technologies to identify people. A GPS signal on a mobile phone reveals 10 people in a street corner, for example, and then it was easy for the police to drive by before it became a massive demonstration. I also spoke with activists who were arrested only one day after they turned on their mobile phone after having been in hiding for months. People's laptops were seized, people's social media and email accounts were broken into, and a number of people were confronted with excerpts of all their communications in prison while they were being interrogated and tortured. And so we had to find out what systems the government was using. Very sadly, I discovered that a number of these, what I call digital arms or heavily intrusive systems, have a label made in Europe or made in the United States. And I think that we owe it to our promise of the responsibility to promote and defend universal human rights that we curb the trade in these digital arms. And it's very necessary that governments get a better sense of what's happening. We desperately need transparency and accountability of companies in this space. It's a very gray and sometimes even completely invisible market where companies whose names you and I may not even know are trading with governments, secret services and others with the sole purpose and the specifically identified purpose of mass surveillance, mass censorship, of tracking and tracing of individuals based on, words they may use: democracy, demonstration, election. The sophistication of technologies can really be used against people and their well-being and their human rights. But we shouldn't forget that there's also great opportunities for us to help people share information, access information, but also freely express or document human rights abuses that then can be used to gain justice. To be short, it's kind of like a cat and mouse game, but it is still the case that democratic governments have a responsibility to update their rules and regulations to match the time in which we live, to match the technological developments. And I think that curbing the export of digital arms is one of the first things we need to do. Well, I think there are two main concerns that we need to look at. One is the human rights concern, which I believe is fundamentally important, but sometimes is perceived as more of a soft issue. Sadly, but this is true. And there is another part why we have to be very concerned about where these digital arms end up, and that is because they may also be used against our own national security, our own strategic interests. And to that extent, and also in relation to human rights, I find it astonishing to what extent governments are just letting this market develop completely unregulated, where just some hackers are developing exploits which allow entry into people's computers through holes in software systems that many people use. Basically, these exploits or vulnerabilities are sold to the highest bidder. And this could be a government of another country, it could be a organized crime organization, it could be a terrorist organization, or it could possibly be our own governments. The fact is we don't know what this digital arms market looks like. I'm a liberal politically speaking. I don't believe in over-regulating. I think people and businesses are suffering from huge bureaucracy, but I cannot understand, and I think it is not right, that we look at the quality of water for health reasons. That makes sense. We look at environmental standards when we develop chemicals or energy products, but when it comes to these highly sophisticated and intrusive technological systems, we lack a set of laws, regulations and rules to make sure that human rights are defended and that our own strategic and security interests are secured as well. It's a matter of updating laws that we have on export controls, basically transparency and accountability. We may need some licensing requirements, for example, on the part of companies, but if we want to make relevant policies in today's day and age, it's time for government to really shape up. So it's hard to avoid reading and hearing about cyber every day. I mean, cyber warfare, cyber security, cyber espionage. They're in our newspapers, they're in our evening news every day. And I think it is important that people are aware that the way in which we use technologies also bears risks, and that we each have a responsibility to protect our communications and our access to information. But it's also important that we know where these threat assessments come from. And realistically speaking, a lot of companies selling cybersecurity software are bringing out reports that are then being quoted by the media, and that can sometimes create a bit of a hype. Now, that's not to say that there's nothing going on, but I do believe that it's important that we have evidence-based policy making, because the act of state-sponsored espionage would be very serious, and it would lead to pretty serious consequences. But similarly, if there is an unjust accusation of cyber espionage, that could also lead to a number of negative consequences. Recently, there have been a number of countries accusing each other. I'm thinking about China and the United States, but also North Korea is into that factor, and also Russia, for example. I believe it is essential that we get some of the actual facts on the table, done by researchers, scientists, and not just by businesses that may benefit from assessing, for example, that your car may well be hacked, and so you need to buy security software. Now imagine the amount of cars that drive around in Europe and the potential benefits that could bring to that company. I think it is important that we know what's going on. I think it is essential that we don't save large bulks of data, so that if the system is compromised, immediately large piles of information are available. We need to all be part of building a more resilient society. And here the tendency sometimes is to define the situation we're in a new cyber Cold War, or in a cyber arms race, or in a cyber standoff between countries. And this may well be, an analogy, but it's important that we don't confine the solutions in military headquarters or in government meeting rooms, but that consumers, internet users, NGOs, and the government, as well as businesses, together take responsibility to build a resilient society, where we also don't forget what it is we're defending, and that is our freedoms. And we've learned, hopefully, from the war on terror, that there is a great risk to compromise freedom for alleged security, and that is a mistake we should not make again.